I'm Rob Moore.
And I'm Lee Moore.
This is the Chinese Literature Podcast.
We're back to Huaben.
Let's just review what's a Huaben, Lee.
Huaben, or also known as a Huaben xiaoshuo, is a kind of literary story that's very popular in the late Ming, early Qing. So we're talking maybe like from 1500 to 1700.
Yeah, mid to late 1700s.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The stories are told in vernacular, mostly.
A written vernacular. I don't know that people were actually speaking what we see on the page.
Right, although the stories are constantly referencing storytelling and storytellers, so they're pretending like they're...
It's a storytelling vernacular.
Yeah. And we have some famous ones, famous authors of Huaben. Mm-hmm. There's Feng Menglong, who we're looking at today. We've also done Li Yu. There are all these kind of very popular stories that are just kind of fun, and they all revolve around sort of karmic order. By that, we just mean things that go around come around. You know, like you get yours in the end. Everybody who does something bad is supposed to have something bad happen to them in the end, and everybody who does something good is supposed to have something good happen to them.
This is the Ming-Qing version of genre fiction. You know, something like science fiction or fantasy you read because of the conventions of the genre. You expect certain things to happen. Someone in a fantasy story finds a magical item. Certain things are supposed to happen, etc., etc. And in these, if someone does something that is not in keeping with propriety, or they're really, really mean, you can expect by the end of the story they're going to get nailed somehow.
And authors play with that.
Of course. They tweak it, or they make you wait too long, or we talked in a different podcast about Shen Xiu, who has a bird, and a whole weird series of events happen, but we talked about whether or not this really is karmic retribution, because some people who seem to make a tiny mistake get beheaded and just go, man, this is awful. So,
one thing we should also point out is that these stories are like genre fiction in that they're meant for popular consumption.
Yes.
This is not, at the time it was produced, high literature.
No, it was not. It was not. And in fact, this is, and we'll talk about this at a different podcast. I'll just introduce it very briefly. But by the end of the 19th century, this is one of the concerns with quote-unquote serious scholars and writers is, well, you have this fun stuff, but, you know, shouldn't the people be reading stuff that's good for them? That's like making them better people? This is just entertainment. This is amusement. The story that we're reading for today is really interesting and very, very, it's a lot of fun.
It's so kind of unexpected.
It is.
Because it's essentially a primer on early modern Chinese capitalism.
Yeah.
It's how to be a good capitalist.
Mm-hmm. It's called The Tangerines and the Tortoise Shell by Feng Menglong.
Another thing that's quite interesting about it is that it deals with ideas of foreigners and foreign things. And the thing that's so interesting is it's kind of like how to get knowledge and who knows what is valuable. And in the end, the person who is most knowledgeable about it is, weirdly, a Persian, like Iranian, an Iranian trader who was in China at the time. This is not something that you see in most Chinese stories. Right. Chinese stories are China has traditionally been, in general, very suspicious about foreigners and foreign ideas, and they're pretty much always wrong.
Right.
So could we maybe just go over the plot of the story?
Sure. I'll just summarize it real quick because it's really fun. It's really a fun story. I want to highlight this again. It's kind of like an Arabian Nights story. So the story's about a guy named Wen Shi, who's a kind of jack of all trades. The text says he can do anything he sort of turns his hand to, but for a variety of reasons, heaven hasn't favored him, so he's never been able to find a wife or a home. And he decides never succeeds in his enterprises, and he decides to go ahead and turn his hand to business, making fans. That goes belly up. So then he decides to see the world. He's going to go abroad with a bunch of traders, but he doesn't have any money to take goods. So a friend gives him some money, and he buys some tangerines, and they set sail. Everyone makes fun of him until they get to their first destination, which is a foreign land, and there, no one's got tangerines. And everyone is fighting over his tangerines, and he ends up making about 1,000 taels of silver.
Which is quite a lot of money.
A lot of money. And so the other merchants make fun of him, or not make fun of him. The other merchants say, hey, you should use that. Buy some goods and sell those in China and make a killing. And he's like, yeah, no, I've never had any success. I'm keeping the taels of silver. And they all make fun of him because they think it's stupid. And they sail on, get caught in a storm, get shipwrecked on a desert island. He's the only one who decides to explore the island and finds a huge tortoise shell
It's unexplained. It's just kind of sitting
this
around.
massive thing.
Yeah.
And he says, this could be a lot of fun to show off, and everyone will know I've been in a cool place. Takes it back to the boat. Again, everyone makes fun of him. They make harbor in Fujian again, and this Persian, the Persian Lee mentioned earlier, who does most of the buying in the port, has all the merchants over for dinner. Mr. Wynn gets the low seat at the table because he doesn't seem to have anything worth selling. The Persian does remark that he's not drinking, and so says, hey, why don't you have a couple drinks of wine anyway? Maybe because he feels sorry for him. Then he goes to inspect the goods the next day, the Persian does, and sees the shell and goes, who in the world has this shell, and why haven't you told me about this? And it turns out it's unbelievably, unimaginably valuable. And the Persian offers to spend an incredible amount of money. Mr. Wynn eventually, through the intermediary of some of his friends, asked for 50,000 pieces of silver.
And what's interesting is Wen Shi doesn't know how valuable it is at first.
No
and
clue.
The Persian keeps raising the price.
The Persian keeps saying, you're kidding me. You can't just ask for 10,000. You're making fun of me. It has to be at least this. The guy makes 50,000 pieces of silver. Everyone freaks out.
And then sign a contract, and there's actually a contract in the story. Mm-hmm. Like, we see what
written
a contract
down.
looks like.
And then the Persian says, the only thing is, this is so much freaking silver, I don't see any way you're going to get home to Suzhou with this much silver. Why don't you invest some of this in a silk business I have? You can just keep it. I mean, you can just live here, and you can go home whenever you want. And he decides to do that, and that's essentially the end of the story.
The reason that it's valuable, the tortoise shell is valuable, is what?
Is because it is the shell of a dragon. That's not shell, but it's like
it contains these
carapace or something.
Gigantic pearls inside the carapace. And only the Persian knows this.
Yes.
And he is not willing to share that until after they draw up the contract. And funny, his friends, who are supposedly good traders,
have no clue what it is.
They have no clue, but they're also like, hey, you ought to welch on that deal.
Yeah.
Because you didn't know that, and so there's no reason.
This guy totally took you. You should,
But Winsha says, no, he actually, raised the price.
And we have a contract.
In the end, this story is essentially, we were discussing this before, a primer on how to be a good capitalist. So what are some characteristics of a good capitalist in the early 17th century China?
One of the properties is that whatever you get, you trade for more and just keep going up the ladder. So,
but he doesn't do that.
Right.
Remember with the silver.
But that's what I'm saying. At the time, see, this is the trick. It's a primer on how to be a good capitalist. But interestingly enough, the stuff that would ordinarily make you a good capitalist doesn't work in this story.
I think what this story is saying is don't be a jerky capitalist. So Winsha lucks into this silver with all his tangerines. Mm-hmm. And then his buddies are like, hey, you ought to go trade that and get some more goods because, then you'll be making some money.
Which is true.
But Winsha is like, no, I'm just going to stick with what I have. I'm not going to go the full 9 yards and go crazy on this. And then when all of his friends are like, you ought to welch on this deal that you already have a contract on because, it wasn't fair disclosure. He's like, no, this is how you be a good capitalist. You recognize value.
See, I don't see that as being a good capitalist.
That's because you're wrong.
I think pretty much... This is funny because ordinarily you're the elitist and I'm the proletariat, but this time we're going to reverse it.
Yeah.
Because he's told early on by the merchants in what is real capitalism, which is the mobility of goods. Keeping stuff to yourself and sitting on it, that's not capitalism. It's you have a thing and you have a lot of it, but you want more. And so you endeavor to get as much as possible through the intermediary of these goods that you can trade. You don't just sit on it and say, nah, I'm going to stick with what I got.
But there is this kind of equivalency. There's a moral capitalism that this story is talking about as much as an economic capitalism.
Moral
capitalism. Yes, absolutely.
I'm not buying that.
So here's what this story is. Winsha is just as, he's a moral guy. And he sees value in other people. And the Persian sees value in other people, too. That's why I think the Persian comes up to him when Winsha is not drinking. And he goes, hey, you ought to have a drink with me. Because he recognizes an inherent moral value in Winsha. And these traders who their business is supposed to be seeing value in things and people, when they look at that tortoise shell, And when they look at those tangerines, they laugh at him and they're like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. They don't recognize the value in those things. And they also don't recognize the value in Wen Shi. They look past him. They're constantly laughing at him and what he's doing.
Right, but Wen Shi is frankly a moron.
He's not a moron.
No, wait. Let me finish.
He's a genius. He's a genius capitalist.
The guy's blessed by heaven. As it says in the story, he's lucky. Each turn, he does something that should not work. So he gets the tails of silver, the pieces of silver, and he just sits on them. Because he's like, well, I don't know, it's best I've gotten for a while. At no point is there any indication that he's thinking long term. Like, you know what? If I can just keep this, then I can. In the text, he just holds it because he's scared to do anything with it. And that's why they laugh at him. And why does the Persian recognize him? I see no indication anywhere in the text that the Persian says to himself or anyone else, you know what? I see something. This guy has value. The Persian is working with common hospitality and is recognizing that there is a guest at his table that is morose and withdrawn. And any good host, even the lowest guest, if they're sitting that way, you have to do something. You have to recognize that, no, you should be a part of this dinner, even if you're at a low seat. So I'm curious how you're seeing that the Persian sees in Wen Shi a personal sort of ethical value.
Yeah, so why does the Persian raise the price? So when he sees the tortoise shell, he goes, I want that. How much? And Wen Shi says, oh, some small amount of money. And he's like, right. No, it's way too small. And there's this whole kind of like debate of the Persian. I mean, it's this. There's this whole kind of discussion of the Persian raising the price, and it takes up like a whole page or something in the text, where he's just like, no, that's not enough. That's not enough. That's absolutely not what a good capitalist should do. But the Persian is a good capitalist because he's not going to screw you over. Wen Shi is a good capitalist because he's not going to go for too much. He's not, once he gets his silver, he's not going to go like, oh, I should go back in there and trade. Part of being a good capitalist is knowing your limits and accepting certain things and saying, you know, I'm not going to go any farther than this. I've made enough money.
I think one of the problems we're having is we're throwing on the term capitalist as a sort of marker for, I don't know what, but you keep saying a good capitalist or a bad capitalist and a moral capitalist.
I said moral capital, not moral capitalist.
I think you said moral capitalist. We'll have to go back. I'll edit it out so I'm right and you're wrong. I get to edit this one. I'm going to edit out so Lee looks like an idiot.
No. As if I need any help.
I know, that's true. That is true. I should just leave everything in. The thing that's interesting to me about the story, you have the merchants, and these are professionals in what we might sort of reasonably refer to as capitalism. These are people who trade for a living. They trade for a living. Then you have someone who knows zero about it. And by the end of the story, he's the wealthy one, they're poor.
He's a jack of all trades. He does know about business. He's just heaven has not favored him.
But this is the part of the story we haven't really talked about much, and we need to, because in good Huaban fashion, the question of karma or the will of heaven or fate is brought in. And the opening of the story says there's a guy who's good at doing stuff, but just has no luck. And then before he sets sail on the voyage, this is a detail we forgot to mention in the summary, a fortune teller says, you're going to make your fortune. You're going to become incredibly wealthy. And he does, because clearly heaven has ordained it, willed it.
Well, it's not that clear. This is the question that seems to hang over this story. Is Wen Shi fated to be wealthy? Or is he wealthy because he works hard? And the story constantly plays with that.
See, this is what's funny, because we talked about this beforehand. You keep doing this work hard thing, and I have no clue where you're getting this.
It says in the text, it says his friends were too lazy to go to the island to get the tortoise shell.
Right. The narrator says that his friend, they're not his friends, they're people on the boat. Anyway, they're too lazy to go ashore, but why does he go ashore? The text nowhere says that Wen Shi, being an enterprising soul and wishing to take advantage of all his opportunities, goes ashore. It says he's bored and he's tired of waiting on the ship. And
so he says he's bored.
Yes.
But at the very least, it's valorizing curiosity as a kind of enterprisingness.
I don't see that.
I'm sorry, but you're wrong.
I don't see this. Well, this is funny, though, because and this is a question that comes up with a lot of Huabun, just how serious is the narrator about the commentary?
How much do we trust him?
How much do we trust him? Because most Huabun, the narrator takes you on a ride and sometimes uses the embedded commentary where the narrator says something to you directly to kind of mess with you.
Footnote, if you're taking any literature class, always say, how do we know how to trust this narrator?
Exactly. As the narrator. No,
but you're right.
But Wensher's stated reason for going on the journey in the first place is a kind of why not. Everything else is bombed. I might as well see the world, and that way when I die, at least I will have done that, right? Why does he sell tangerines? Because everyone's like, I'll buy your tangerine. And he's like, all right, well, I guess buy my tangerine, whatever. Why does he go ashore? At least according to him, it's because he's sick and tired of waiting around on the ship to go home, so he decides to check the island out, and he does. And then, so that every step of the way, things happen, not because he is enterprising, he just does them. They just sort of goes with the flow.
So you're reading Wenshe as a kind of Taoist capitalist. Go with the flow. If heaven fates it, you'll be wealthy as all get out.
He's not a complete moron, because he has this bag of silver from his tangerines and says, yeah, I think I'm going to keep this. I don't know about it, because I haven't had any other luck so far, But what I don't see is that Wensher either A, has a plan, or B, has any sort of business savvy involved. He is, like you said, he is a good person, and so he doesn't want to fleece the Persian. He doesn't want to renege on his contract, because it's a contract. He's an honorable man. He doesn't want to fleece the islanders with his tangerines. They're like, we'll give you a piece of silver for the tangerine. He's like, okay, sure, why not? He doesn't automatically raise it to 10, right? So he's a good person, but at no point do we see that he is shrewd, enterprising, even hard-working.
But that's the point of the story. Well, everything except for the hard-working part. You don't like people who are petty capitalists, and I mean petty not in the sense of small-time capitalists, but petty in the sense that they're going to bilk you out of every dime that they can bilk you out. They end up making less money than people who are moral capitalists.
Well, but see, the thing is...
And I did use the term moral capitalist.
Yeah, you did totally do it.
There we go.
You outed yourself. The merchants don't make a lot of money, but in the text, it's not clear that they don't make any money.
No, I'm sure they do make some money, but
this is
small
my point.
Time.
But to hold up Wensher as a sort of model for some sort of class is, I don't think you can make that argument.
That's what the text is doing.
Well, but
it's holding him up and saying, this is the guy you should be like. He's the one who makes all the money.
Except that if you're going to make that case, then the case is that you should have no plan and just go where the wind takes you. Because he doesn't have a plan. He has no idea what to do.
He doesn't have a plan, but he is enterprising. He gets off the boat. He does trade things. He goes like, yeah, sure, I'll get those tangerines and I'll trade them with you.
But he doesn't initiate that. He's pulling out the tangerines just to see if they've gone rotten because they've been on the boat a long time. And then someone says, hey, what's that? And he says, well, it's a piece of fruit. And then the guy takes it, opens it up, and then offers to buy it. He literally has no idea he can even sell this, You're looking at someone who's a good person, but who has no clue how any of this system of trade works.
But the point of the story is that being a good person is the first step to being a good capitalist.
Okay. See, I don't see being a good capitalist. I would agree with being a good person can result in you finding what you were looking for in the beginning, but not that it will make you essentially a better version of what the merchants are, which is capitalists. I don't see that argument at all. I see that being a good person in this story yields to some sort of good outcome because it's a karmic story, but not that it leads you to being a good trader, capitalist, because he's not. He's an awful trader. But he's just lucky.
But he ends up making that money.
He does, but that doesn't mean he's good at it.
You think it's entirely fate?
I think, that depends. I think it's entirely fate if we trust the story, because the whole frame of the story is to illustrate in this narrative context how heaven essentially helps certain people. Mm-hmm. That's the stated beginning of the story. That's what the narrator gives us. And because Wensher, he's not lazy, he does work, he knows how to do things, he responds to certain situations, but his success has nothing to do with whether or not he understands trade. It has everything to do in the story with him being a good person and having decided to bless him. So, I mean, that's where I come down on this story.
But it's not clear that what happens to Wen Shi is the result of fate in this story. I mean, there are all these suggestions. The narrator says, oh, this is definitely going to happen. The fortune teller says this is going to happen.
Right.
But it's not clear that it happens to him because of fate or because he's hardworking. And I really do think he is hardworking.
Lee and I are going to forever disagree about this, but I want to introduce something that you and I probably do agree on, and that is one of the things that's interesting about these vernacular stories is precisely this question. Because this karmic retribution and sort of things working out in the end happens to various extents through every one of these stories, and you're always left wondering, because the narrator makes you do that, did this person really get this because heaven just gave it to them, or because they actually earned it? And we're disagreeing about this. If you just read the narrative itself, based on, if we trust the narrator 100%, it's heaven, 100%.
Yeah,
because
the narrator
starts off and ends by saying, that's what this is.
But the narrator at several points suggests that it might be hard work.
Right, which is why there's a weird sort of tension here. The narrator tells us to our faces that it's heaven, and then in the events of the story seems to reverse that. So what do we do? One of the things that I kind of wanted to end on is by the late 19th, early 20th century, there's a real push in modern sort of Chinese scholarship and writing to have a more self-consciously serious literature, like European realism, Russian realism, etc. And people like Liang Qichao call for a new fiction. We have to have something new.
Zhou Zuren
is calling for something sort of self-consciously serious. And the idea is that all the old stuff, especially the stuff we're talking about right now, is almost harmful for the people to read.
That sounds the Huaben are harmful.
Right. Read in the context of the 19th century in which rapacious foreign powers have propagated the Opium Wars, they've colonized ports throughout China. If you're looking for a way to remedy this, and you have a story that says, at least in so many words, heaven will work it all out, and then you have a guy who's getting rich off of a global capitalist system without having any idea what he's doing.
And the guy who knows the most about what is valuable in
is not Chinese.
It's not Chinese. He's Persian.
Uh-huh. All these weird twists. It would be a very peculiar story to know what to do with in an era when it looks like China's just being the doormat of the world. Now, I'm not defending that because I think it's a wonderful story. I would want everyone to read this story. Yeah. But if your specific concern is we have got to do something to get our country into a position to compete with these people, this story, which, regardless of how hard-working we see Wen Shi, I don't see how you can argue that he doesn't understand the system of global capital the way the merchants do. He comes out better than they do for a variety of reasons, but he doesn't understand how it works. If you're presenting the story to people, right, and as a lot of these guys were in the late 19th or 20th century, if you're looking for literature to sort of teach the people, to help them, this would not be the story that you used, you know?
Yeah.
Just wander the world and then find a huge tortoise shell. You'll get rich. Just wait on heaven, you know? And again, as we just talked about, as you can see by our constant disagreement, there's a lot more going on in the story than that.
And there are multiple ways to read it.
Absolutely. You can kind of see where May 4th writers would be coming from with this story.
In rejecting this kind of fiction and saying, hey, we need to abandon this. This is not good. This is killing our nation.
Right. Yeah. Now, of course, that's a one-to-one. They read a story and then they go do this thing, which no one ever does, but whatever.
It's interesting. I think we should call it.
Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I think that was fantastic.
That's good. Yeah. Read it. As with all the Huaben, I'll say it again, you can read them to really understand a great deal about the era, but you can just enjoy them. This is a fun story.
And you can find this in the
Stories Old and New. You can find it on Amazon. Translators are Yang Shuhui and Yang Yunqin, and the author himself is Feng Menglong.
Sounds like a way to end it.
Let's end it.
I'm Lee Moore.
I'm Rob Moore.
And this is the Chinese Literature Podcast.